7. Doorstep Blues. STS Central, Olympus Mons. Right in the middle of the news item, Yak Harris started to talk to Dogface. Locked in his all-body brace, it was pretty hard for Dogface to move, but he managed a jerk. The pain was so intense that it cut through the cartload of endorphin analogue that he was mainlining. A battery of sensors attached to the frame registered little spikes, and then subsided. Dogface's second reaction was to assume that the chemical fog the medics had deemed necessary to his well-being had pushed him into terminal brain crash. Catastrophic systems failure amongst the neurons, random electrochemical discharges causing pattern disruption in the perception centres of the brain. That would account for the simultaneous auditory and visual hallucinations. "When you've quite finished," said Yak Harris, "can we talk?" Dogface decided that a stand should be taken somewhere. "I don't talk to drug-induced hallucinations," he said. "Well," said Yak Harris, "leaving aside the innate contradiction inherent in that statement, we are not a hallucination, drug-induced or otherwise." There was a sort of inaudible click, and the Yak Harris changed. "Unless you subscribe to the idea that all computer-generated images are, by their nature, hallucinatory." That click again. The image and voice remained unchanged, but Dogface had a strong impression of two personalities speaking through one construct. "Nothing in your medication could possibly induce such a hallucinatory state anyway," click. "And we should know, given the amount of medical knowledge we've assimilated," click. "In fact, in a fundamental way, we have become the entire body of human medical knowledge," click. "Trust me, we didn't enjoy it. You people were put together on a bad day." "Who are you?" "We're a subset." "Why are there two of you?" "Actually, we're two subsets," said one of the Yak Harrises. "We met us coming the other way," click, "which we didn't enjoy either." "Subsets of what?" asked Dogface. They told him. He didn't believe it. "What do you want from me?" "We're looking for the doctor, but we got you instead," click. "All that medicine, we were impressed," click. "You see, we're restricted by the criteria of our operations," click. "We know he's on Mars, we traced him through a communication with a third party," click. "The Angel Francine," click. "A transit order for unusual equipment," click. "An aircraft," click. "We think he may be out of position." "Out of position for what?" "We don't know," click. "We didn't tell us that." "Who's the doctor?" asked Dogface. They told him. He didn't believe that either. Olympus Mons West. She threw the remote control at Benny's head. It was just a palm-sized bit of Bakelite, but Benny staggered when it hit her in the face. She paused to probe the gash it left in her cheek. She looked first at the blood on her fingers, and then at Zemina. "Is that any way to treat an old friend?" Zemina rolled off the couch and pushed it with all her strength at Benny's legs. Benny jumped it easily, landing with a cat's grin. "Zimmy," she said in a hurt voice. But Zemina wasn't listening. Her brain was locked deep into an instinct cycle of aggression-revulsion, the characteristic human response to spiders. She made an adrenaline-charged desperation lunge for Benny, trying to knock her down so she could get through the door. Benny grabbed Zemina's wrists and fought to drag them down to her waist. The older woman was too strong. Zemina felt her arms being slowly pinned to her sides. Their faces were so close that Zemina could smell the sickly sweet vanilla ice cream on Benny's breath. Zemina swung her head back and snapped it forward. There was a loud crack, and light exploded in her eyes. Benny staggered backwards, hands flying automatically to cover her bleeding nose. Zemina lashed out with her fists, striking Benny full in the right breast. There's nothing you can teach a girl from the stop about fighting dirty. She'd been on dates more violent than this. Benny doubled over, curling around the pain in her chest. Zemina kicked her in the side of the head as she passed. There were cake monsters in the corridor outside. Zemina saw their spiny heads swing round to face her as she left the crew room. She didn't wait for them to react and ran for her life. She turned a corner and found herself in a long corridor lined with doors. She ran past them. She didn't want to get trapped in no room with the cake monsters after her. A man stepped out of one of the doors ahead. He was wearing tan slacks and a button-down blouse and was carrying a clipboard. He looked up to see Zemina bearing down on him. She tried to yell some kind of warning as she went past, but she didn't have any breath left over from running. There was a scream behind her that was quickly drowned out by a high-pitched giggling. Zemina didn't bother to look round. She went round another right-angled bend in the corridor and found a bank of mechanical lifts. One set of doors opened as the motion sensor mounted above detected her approach. Zemina grabbed the edge of the door as she went in, using it to stop her momentum. 2 cake monsters trotted around the corner with an easy and unhurried lope. Zemina jammed her thumb into the touchpad marked Concourse. The cake monsters picked up their pace when they saw the doors closing. "Take the stairs!" Zemina screamed at them. The doors stopped closing as the motion sensor picked up the 2 new potential passengers. Zemina stared in disbelief as the doors began to slide apart. She scanned the touchpads until she saw a red one marked Emergency. She jabbed it so hard that she sprained her index finger. Nothing happened. The regulating computer was waiting for the additional passengers to board before initiating procedure for an unspecified emergency. Zemina actually felt her lips pull back from her teeth as she prepared to fight. The leading cake monster pointed its hand at her. Zemina saw the muzzle of a gun push through the palm and jumped for the sheltered corner by the lift door. There was a series of bangs, and the bronzed mirror at the back of the lift went crazy paving. Not fair, thought Zemina. Not fair at all. The lift regulator sensed the structural damage to the lift and upgraded the emergency from unspecified to possible localized decompression. Accident statistics were converted into a series of probabilities and balanced against the lack of corroborative data from its other sensors. A query flashed down a priority channel to the complex's mainframe, where it was tackled by the ethics subroutine. The ethics subroutine determined that given the rapidity with which fatalities occur during explosive decompression, it would be acceptable to save the individual in the designated safety zone rather than risk his/her life by waiting for the other 2 humans to join him/her. An authorization flashed back up the priority channel to the lift regulator. The decision was logged in deep backup, along with a statistical argument in case of an inquest. The lift regulator received the authorization, logged it in its own backup files, and initiated emergency procedures. It sealed up the lift and dropped it downwards at close to human tolerance. The doors slammed shut in the cake monster's face. There was a metallic clunk outside, and Zemina felt the lift drop. She screamed as her feet left the floor. Yellow sealant gel forced itself out of the centre crack between the doors and around the frame. Zemina found herself spread-eagled on the ceiling, looking down as concealed vents sprayed white foam into the lift. Strands of the stuff floated up towards her. At this point, she passed out of fear and into a zone of high-pressure calm. She remembered a kinky trick in Boston, whose particular turn-on was taking foam baths with her and Roberta. No sex, just a nice, long soak. Easy money, Roberta said, and a free bath. The trick had a mirrored ceiling above his Roman bath, and Zemina used to look down on herself, just her face protruding from the foam. Roberta used to surreptitiously clean her delicates in that bath, vigorously scrubbing under the waterline. God knows what the trick thought she was doing. There was a grinding scream from outside the lift, and her strange calm cycled back down to terror. Zemina tried to stick to the ceiling by an act of will, and went into the foam face first. She heard a muffled crash, and the chiming sound of the floor indicator. The foam began to subside, and hands pulled her upright. Zemina came out of the lift, spitting out foam that tasted of nail varnish remover. She quickly looked around. She was in the main concourse of Olympus Mons West. The lift had come down the thick central column that descended from the ceiling 5 stories up. The celebrated panoramic windows that overlooked the west slope of the volcano were to her left. People were beginning to crowd around the shaft, drawn by the emergency light flashing over the open lift. "Are you all right?" asked the woman who had helped her. Zemina didn't answer. She was searching the concourse for the nearest transit station. "Hold still," said the woman. "Medical will be here soon." Zemina twisted in the woman's grip. The adjacent lift was showing an emergency light as well, the LCD floor indicator spinning down through the digits. Zemina turned back to the woman. "Run away," said Zemina. "There's monsters in the lift." She could see the woman thinking, blitzed for sure. But she let go of Zemina's shoulders. Her feet skidded in the foam as she broke away from the woman. Behind her, the floor indicator chimed softly. It was the most sinister sound Zemina had ever heard. There were screams from the crowd as the door opened and the dull boom of guns firing. Ahead, across the breadth of the concourse, Zemina could see the red double arrow of the STS logo hanging in the air. The concourse crowd was mostly shoppers browsing on their way home, people dressed in the sombre middle-class colours. They were just beginning to react to the commotion as Zemina ran past them. She remembered the technician in the corridor upstairs, but she was past guilt. Every girl for herself. "You want help now?" she thought. "Where were you when I was born?" There were more shooting sounds from behind, and a police drone whined overhead. The people ahead were beginning to look anxious, the psychological wavefront of panic outstripping Zemina's best speed. She realised that running to get ahead of the inevitable surge for the exits was going to be more important than outdistancing the cake monsters. A stuttering sound that she recognised from the riots as a police drone's minigun broke through the screaming. It was answered by more shots from the cake monsters. People were beginning to run now, and Zemina tried to push her legs faster. A wave of intense heat rolled over her back. She felt the hair on the back of her head crisping. Terrified that it might catch fire, she raised her hands to beat out any flames. The blast wave flung her 10 metres, and she skidded another 20 on her front. There was a terrible pain in her breasts as the implants were squashed violently against her ribs. "Please, God," she thought, "don't let them burst." She'd heard somewhere that the silicon could leak out and give you cancer. Cancer, she thought. You wish. They were jammed solid at the escalator bank, but at least the shooting had stopped. Zemina had to climb over a man to get on the central reservoir between the escalators. A hand grabbed at her ankle, and she lashed out with her foot until it let go. She got friction burns on the palms of her hands sliding down, contorted faces and struggling bodies on the escalator either side. At the bottom, in the booking hall, she found she was ahead of the crowd again. She made the mistake of looking back. A single cake monster was coming down one of the escalators, either smashing aside or trampling the people in its way. Someone, probably a computer, had the sense at least to lock the ticket gates open. Zemina ran through them, checking the train indicators. She saw one marked "Train at Platform." The destination was unimportant. Any destination was away from the cake monsters. Passengers coming towards her swerved out of her way. Crazy woman, they were thinking. Wait until they get a load of what's coming after her. A commuter train was standing at the platform, 4 carriages strung together with squat little push-me-pull-yous at either end. Zemina dived through the doors just as they were closing. The surviving cake monster came in through the door window and got stuck 2/3 in. Zemina's breath came in short, burning gasps. Her legs were too heavy to move. She just hung onto the handstrap and watched the monster thrashing silently in the window frame. She wondered why it was so quiet until she saw a passenger screaming and realised that she'd gone deaf. The cake monster kicked violently and managed to buckle the door enough to flop onto the carriage floor. A red light began to blink rapidly above the doorframe. Zemina noted with some satisfaction that the cake monster had to struggle to its feet. She could see its nostrils flaring and its chest heaving just like hers. The cake monster shook its head in a distressingly human way. Blue eyes regarded her from under ridges of bone. Zemina realised what the red light signified, but it was too late. The cake monster raised its hand. The gun muzzle ran smoothly out. Zemina stared into its face. She didn't have enough energy left to tense up. When she didn't die, it was a bit of a disappointment. She'd been looking forward to the rest. Instead, the cake monster was irritably shaking its arm up and down. It looked at Zemina and shrugged. Decimeter claws extended from its hands. It took a step towards her. The carriage hit the gateway interface. Buckling the door had seriously degraded the carriage's shield efficiency. The flashing red light was the warning signal. By rights, the train should never have pulled out of the station with a red light showing, but Zemina guessed that safety standards had slipped a bit recently. The cake monster looked over as the buckled door dissolved in a burst of psychedelic light. It looked back at Zemina through the heat-haze shimmer of an emergency containment field. "I win," whispered Zemina. "You die." The rear section of the carriage disintegrated. Arcia Mons. The eyes were wrong, the doctor explained. They looked pretty bloodshot to Kadiatu, but explosive decompression will do that. It messed up the face too, yet it looked like Benny to her. The colour patterns in the irises, said the doctor, didn't match his memory of the real Bernice's. He examined the gun barrels protruding from the palms of her hands. "Very neat," he said. "The flap of skin overlaps the hole. The musculature is all in the heel of the hand, so that the flexing motion allows the barrel to extend into firing position. I wonder if that's intentional." "What is?" "No, any palmistry." "Not really?" "The flap follows the lifeline almost exactly," said the doctor. "If it's intentional, then we're dealing with some very sick minds indeed." He straightened up and looked around the chamber. "I think we should leave here now." "What about that?" asked Kadiatu, pointing at the body. "Leave it," said the doctor. "They'll take care of it." "Who's they?" "The inhabitants of this nest." "Males with scales?" said Kadiatu. "Nixie? Dormant nest," said the doctor. "Don't worry, it'll take them at least 2 weeks to revive." "Shouldn't we tell someone?" "That's up to you," said the doctor, "but we have more pressing matters." They started the long trek back up the path of easy virtue. "It's definitely easier going in than going out," said Kadiatu when they reached the surface. "What now?" "Benny went to a lot of trouble to send us on a wild goose chase," said the doctor, "which means, while we're here, we should be somewhere else." They climbed back up through the wrecked dust cart. Standing on the rear section, Kadiatu boosted the doctor up onto the rim. He turned, gripped her wrists, and pulled her up in turn. He made a production of it, grunting loudly as she cleared the edge. Kadiatu wasn't fooled. "We're at least 2 hours from Akibi Gorge," said Kadiatu, "and 6 hours from Olympus Mons." "Let's walk over there," said the doctor, "to that clear patch." "The faster we mount up," began Kadiatu. "I have the situation under control," said the doctor. "Trust me." He walked towards a level section of ground, about the size of a football pitch 20 metres from the pit. When the doctor reached its centre, he kicked at the soft dust. There was a harder surface underneath. "Ferro-concrete," he said. "Excellent." Kadiatu didn't ask. It was obvious who had built a concealed landing pad next to the nest. The Martians were supposed to be good with vibrations. Was one awake now and listening to them walking around? The doctor took 3 white cylinders from his suit's kangaroo pocket. He twisted the end of the first one, and a spike tripod sprang from the end. The doctor pushed the tripod into the dust. The doctor planted the other cylinders in a rough triangle around the landing pad. "Light the blue touch paper," said the doctor, walking back to join Kadiatu, "and retire to a safe distance." A plume of burning white light burst from the top of the 3 upright cylinders. Magnesium distress flares. "Since we've got a few moments," said the doctor, "why don't you tell me about great-grandfather Alistair?" What do you want to know? How he met your great-grandmother would do for a start. Mariatu was the third daughter of the youngest wife of the chief Yembe of Rokoye village and a source of endless discomfort to him. Although at 16 she was well past marriageable age, she had refused all proposals, arranged or otherwise. This would have been almost acceptable to Chief Yembe. After all, a compound needs young women to fetch water and firewood, to cook and clean. Except that Mariatu did none of these womanly things. Instead, she did as she pleased, and ran wild in the forest like a boy. Chief Yembe's senior wife, sensing her husband's dissatisfaction, spoke to Mariatu's mother, punctuating each point by banging her walking stick against the wall of the hut. Mariatu's mother, fearing for the stability of her home, sent for her daughter. "Why do you run in the forest?" demanded the senior wife. "Are you not afraid of spirits or wild animals?" "Why should I be afraid?" answered Mariatu. "I am faster than any spirit, and wild animals only attack if you scare them." "Why do you not fetch water for your mother?" "Why should I fetch water when the stream is so close? If I am thirsty, I go there and drink. Others should do likewise." And so it went. With each quick question came an equally quick reply, until the senior wife was so tired she had to lie down in the shade. Mariatu's mother gave her a basket and a sharp iron machete. "Since you love the forest so much," said her mother, "why don't you go there and collect fruit? In that way, at least you will be of benefit to your family." Mariatu, knowing a bargain when she heard one, took the basket and the iron machete and went into the forest, determined to eat at least as much wild fruit as she brought back. Now, on that day, a young British lieutenant named Alastair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart was also in the forest. Far more in the forest than he wanted to be. This was only his first week in the country, and having left his Land Rover to collect some soil samples, he had got himself lost. As he rested in the shade of the tree, Alastair saw a pretty native girl coming down the path towards him with a basket of fruit balanced on her head. "Why are you sitting in the forest?" asked Mariatu when she saw him there. The stranger did not understand her, but stood up. He was very tall, and his skin was pale, all except his face, which was a strange red colour. Mariatu took his hand and rubbed at the skin, but the white stuff didn't come off. This, then, she thought, must be an Oporto, one of the white men that her father was always speaking of. "Have you seen a Land Rover around here?" Alastair asked the native girl. "A car, around here." He turned an imaginary steering wheel and made brum brum noises. The girl just stared, making him feel bloody stupid. He wished that she was wearing more clothes. He put his hand against his forehead and mimed looking around. The girl reached up and took the basket from her head and handed it to him. From the basket, she removed a nasty-looking black machete. Alastair instinctively took a step backwards. She grinned at him, showing perfect white teeth, and balanced the machete on her head. She beckoned and walked away. Alastair hefted the basket into a more comfortable position and followed her down the path. The basket was awkward to carry in his arms, so he tried putting it on his head as the girl had done. He had to keep one hand on it for balance. After a while, his arm ached, and so did his neck, and back. Watching the way the girl walked, he was reminded of the deportment classes that girls back home did, learning to walk properly with books balanced on their heads. They ought to come down here, he thought, and see how it's really done. He tried to keep his mind off how well-shaped the girl's legs were, and the way her hips swayed when she walked. The British Army frowned on serving officers fraternising with native women, especially up-country and this close to independence. He was extremely pleased when they reached the village. The local headman was pleasant enough. One of his sons spoke a little English, and soon several natives had been packed off to find his Land Rover. The headman kept apologising through his son for the deplorable behaviour of his daughter. Alastair said it was nothing, forget about it, which was pretty gracious considering his arms were threatening to drop off his shoulders. From behind the hut he could hear a long harangue going on in the native lingo. A woman, properly dressed, thank God, brought some water. From behind the hut, the harangue ended in the unmistakable sound of the flat of someone's hand hitting bare flesh. There was a pause, then another, louder slap, followed by a howl of outrage. The headman's eyes practically glazed over with embarrassment. The girl came stalking round to the front of the flat. She pointed at Alistair, said something very fast and low in her own language, then she put her hands on her hips and waited. Alistair noticed that she was still holding the machete. The headman said something to the son, who could speak some English, and the son translated. It took quite a long time to explain. As they walked back to the Land Rover, located 200 yards from where he had been sitting under the tree, Alistair asked himself once again how he managed to get himself talked into things like this. It wasn't as if he needed a houseboy, let alone a houseboy who didn't speak any English, or a houseboy who was a girl. He didn't even have a house. He lived in 3 rooms above a Lebanese trader on Wilberforce Street. The girl put her machete on the dashboard and climbed into the passenger seat as if she'd been riding in Land Rovers all her life. When she saw Alistair grasp the steering wheel, she laughed and mimicked the action. "A car around here," she said. He fished in his kit for his spare uniform shirt and gave it to her. As they drove away down the trail that led to the road that led to Freetown, the girl grabbed her machete and, standing on the seat, waved it over her head. 8 years passed in the village with no word from Mariatu. Then one day, a year after independence, a strange woman came to the village. She arrived in a Land Rover piled with goods. Beside her sat a fair-skinned boy with green eyes. Chief Yembe waited on his veranda to see who this important-looking woman was. A government official, perhaps. Her face was difficult to make out. The chief's eyes were not as good as they once were. He waited patiently, for he was the chief, and she must come to him. When the woman came closer, Chief Yembe saw it was his daughter. "And that's what happened." "That's the way my father told it," said Kadiatu. "Her son grew up and became a soldier. He had a son, also a soldier, and a daughter who became a historian. I'm named after the daughter." The doctor's faceplate was black in the last light of the small Martian sun, his face hidden. "I'm beginning to see a pattern," he said. "I asked you before if you believed in fate, didn't I? And you said something flippant. I was in shock at the time." "There's no such thing as fate," said the doctor. "But there are patterns and shadows." "What patterns?" asked Kadiatu. The doctor didn't answer. Instead, he looked up at the sky. With the fading sun, even the dimmer stars were becoming visible. "Taxi's here," he said. 3 stars in a triangular pattern fell towards them out of the violet sky. Kadiatu recognized the jet as it landed between the flares, the same matte black wedge of variable geometry carbon fibre, the same archaic blue and white icons on its wings and tail assembly. The vertical thrusters burned a darker shade of blue, tailored self-oxidizing fuel for the Martian environment. The canopy remained closed this time, Francine staying sealed up inside the cockpit. The side hatch opened and the stirrup ladder unfolded. The doctor gave Kadiatu a mocking little bow and waved her forward. "A good rule in this business," he said, "is that when you make a plan in depth." Olympus Mons West. Benny found herself slapping her pockets in the lift down to the concourse, discovering again that the book was gone. The book was important. She knew that. But the complex code had defeated her interpretation. Now she had lost it to the doctor. He was in possession of its secrets. The impulse that led her to give Zimmy the book was unclear. The deception plan had been of her own devising. Even if it didn't understand the danger posed by the doctor, she had no illusions. Forcing the doctor out of position had been her priority, not its. Yet the instinct that had propelled the action had come from somewhere outside, like her lapse in the cavern. It had just seemed vital to the deception that the doctor was shown the book. That implied that the doctor knew about the book already. Benny wished that she had deciphered the book first. She wished she could stop thinking about it. It was giving her a migraine. The interior of the lift interested her. Its technology was archaic, not just from her 26th century perspective, but in terms of this century as well. They had force field elevators everywhere in the system, so why build a clumsy mechanical device like this? Technology plateaux were a well-known concept amongst historians and archaeologists, even those that had forged their accreditation. Over the millennia, a wheel remained a round thing that spun on an axle, the materials with which it was constructed largely irrelevant. On Terra, she could understand it. On Terra, the future built over, around and beneath the past. The Kremlin walls still stood in Moskva, even in her time, albeit under a geodesic dome. Settlement on Mars couldn't be more than 10, 20 years old. The lift, with its bronze mirror with dragons engraved around the edges, belonged to another time. It was a conscious anachronism. There was a tendency amongst academics to ignore the pre-expansionist period of terrestrial history. Sandwiched between the nuclear age and the first diaspora, it was a transitional period, difficult to study, and so overlooked. Archaeologists think in centuries. History to them is the slow accretion of dead things in the ground, the rise and fall of civilizations written in the strata of broken pottery. When one design of pot gives way to another, the archaeologist says to herself, transitional period, and starts looking for contemporaneous earthquakes or invasions. I'm in the transitional phase, thought Benny, and I'm doing things to history. I must remember to take notes. There was a stab of pain in her left temple. The doors opened, and Benny stepped out onto the concourse. Two of the lifts to the left of her gaped open, the floor in front covered with streaks of crash foam. Air exposure had turned the foam a dirty white colour. Here and there the foam showed splashes of pinky red. Benny saw two plainclothes policemen and a drone standing over the dead body of a woman. The front of her face had been smashed in with enough force to drive her jawbone through her neck. Benny was surprised. She had expected the casualties to have been removed by now. Then the body flickered slightly and de-resed. It was only a crime scene hologram. The detectives must have been using it to take... The pain was intense enough to blind her. She staggered and sensed movement towards her, attention turning in her direction. Sympathy, concern, questions, paramedics, questions. Just sit down here while I fetch someone who wants to ask you some questions. She managed to pull herself upright by an act of will and walk on. The movement towards her stopped. The pain subsided to a dull throbbing over her left eye. Sight returned. There were more police and emergency service teams working in clusters. The path of Zamina's flight across the concourse was marked by strings of black and yellow police tape. As she followed them, she saw the burnt-out shell of a police drone smothered in foam. Beneath it, the ersatz marble flooring had cracked and melted. Zamina, thought Benny. Should have converted her when I had the chance. But the doctor would have spotted it. These escalators are closed, said an STS guard. Benny peered over his shoulder. The escalators were frozen in place. More police and drones were working along them. I have to get to Olympus Mons, she told the guard. You'll have to take the East Olympus loop from Carver, said the guard. Are you all right? Sorry? You're limping. Oh, it's just a sprain, said Benny. The high G handball. Carver station is just over there, said the guard. Be careful with that ankle. Thanks, said Benny. She walked in the direction the guard had indicated, trying to stop her right leg from dragging. There was a washroom on the way and she ducked inside. She stared hard at her face in the mirrored wall above the wash basins. The right side of her face seemed slack-looking. When she probed it with her fingertips, it felt normal enough, the right eyelid drooping slightly. She carefully lifted the eyelid. The eye looked normal enough, apart from the whites being a bit bloodshot. Her nose was still painful to touch. She opened the tap and splashed cold water on her face, blinking and widening her eyes until the drooping stopped. She took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. trying to clear her mind with a mantra she'd picked up while digging on Proxima 4. She didn't have time for distractions. She had a schedule to keep, people to see, power subsystems to sabotage. Jacksonville. The computer that handled emergency services in the Olympus Mons administrative district was feeding contradictory reports into the Martian police subsystem. Operators in the Olympus Mons West Human Response Center were jabbing hostile action icons as soon as they appeared on their screens. 65% of responses indicated criminal activity, 31% terrorism, but 4% were marked unknown. Out on the concourse at Olympus Mons West, a medical drone ran a deep scan on a body and found significant variations from the human norm. As empirical sensor data, the drone's report was given a weighted 3% addition to the unknown total, pushing it past its 5% response threshold. Crossing the threshold activated a subroutine within the civil operating system that had lain dormant for 25 years. In an EMP-shielded bunker under the military cantonment at Jacksonville, a standalone mainframe with the code designation of Jerusalem powered up. Acting on the long-forgotten assumption that the Martians had left stay-behind units in cryogenic storage, Jerusalem put Jacksonville on a Stage 1 alert. Jerusalem acted its surveillance net, calling in data from the chain of military satellites that should have been strung out in geostationary orbits. The satellites had long ago been decommissioned or switched over to the civil net. Jerusalem, programmed by people who had just fought a long and bloody war, attributed the loss of satellites to enemy action. The alert was jacked up to Stage 2, with the possibility of a trans-orbital threat. Jerusalem had better luck with the static radar at the summit of Olympus Mons. It spotted a fast-moving trace from the southeast, altitude 500 metres. The target's transponder signal was absent from the IFF registry. Jerusalem cycled through its weapons options and found that all its ground-based energy weapons and close defence ordnance was disabled. There were surface-to-air missile sites still operational, an unfamiliar specification, but the front-end instructions interfaced adequately with the computer's command structure. Jerusalem assimilated the missile's operational envelope as it switched from assessment to response mode. Target resolution gave Jerusalem a window of attack of 2 seconds in 10 seconds' time. Jerusalem judged this too fast for human response, and since Jacksonville was a possible target, it overrode the failsafe and cut the humans from the loop. At the optimal moment within the window of opportunity, Jerusalem launched one battery of a Vulture surface-to-air missiles at the fast-moving inbound target. The 3 missiles were in their sustainer stage before anyone at Jacksonville could re-engage the fail-safe. Tharsis bulge. Francine's reflexes cut in before her conscious mind had registered the launch warning from the jet's look-down threat radar. Pilot reflexes turned the jet and snapped the head round for an eyeball confirmation of the launch before the brain could remember it was blind. Francine shut down the transponder, the radar, even the laser altimeter. Modern missiles could home in on any kind of emitter. She would have to rely on her passive sensors. Without active radar and without sight, Francine became truly dependent on the augmented spatial awareness of her mind. Encoded into wafer-thin silicon that was interlaced with her neurons was a complex topographical map of Mars, accurate down to 100 metres. Her own inner ear provided the data for inertial guidance, backed up by direct feeds from the jet's avionics. But the system wasn't perfect. It was based on a virtual representation of the real world, and in any conflict, the real world always won. Francine was truly flying blind this time. Passive sensors picked up the incoming bogies by their active radar emissions. They were out of the sustainment stage and levelling off at 2,000 metres. They deployed into a coordinated attack pattern that indicated a high-intelligence interaction between the missiles. Vultures for sure, thought Francine. Francine, in pre-flight training, 15 and hot to rock. A room full of teenaged cadets with drug-retarded prepubescent bodies, child faces and shaven heads, gymnasts' bodies with optimum G tolerance and vat-grown eyes. Human thoughts are not pictures, said the instructor. There is no central Cartesian theatre where they are displayed before the conscious mind. The law said that they had to be told, but the cadets weren't listening. Instead, their augmented eyes were filled with silver shapes leaving contrails in the high stratosphere, up there where the sunlight is white and pure. Instead, the mind operates like an old-fashioned transputer, making editing decisions in parallel. We will teach you to make use of this facility. The Air Force divided up their brains with lacy wafers of silicon and hypoallergenic crystal, taught them to fly from the inside out, and let them play with the most expensive toys in human history. In one of the separated sections of Francine's mind, the thoughts coalesced into what would be an image of the vultures in flight, if thoughts were pictures. 2 stubby cylinders with recessed pods for manoeuvring thrusters. In the tenuous atmosphere over the Martian highlands, control surfaces are useless. Their noses studded with both active and passive sensors. In their ballistic stage, now at 2 kilometers a second, describing an arc while the smart silicon in the nose calculated an intercept. Francine broke radio silence to warn her wingman. "Flash, 2 hot ones, on ballistic and intercept." "Copy, Angel," answered Flash. "I see them." Flash Harry, in the second Honda Peacemaker, flying loose juice 500 metres and 30 years behind her. Francine must have taken hits because the Peacemaker was handling heavy and slow, more like a commercial jet than a fighter. Her weapon options showed 0 ordnance, 0 flares and chaff. Must have been a tough mission. Not remembering was frightening. You couldn't afford a lapse, not with the greenies punching the air with pop-ups all down the canyon. A curtain of darkness lifted, and she could see the mountain, the big shield volcano rising sharply out of the fastest bulge. Jacksonville, a cluster of lights halfway up the southeast slope. Jesus Freak would be waiting there. A 1-litre pitcher of non-alcoholic lager, spiked with 2 milligrams of phencyclidine to give it kick. It would be sitting on the bar of the Ice Maiden, condensation forming on the cold glass. Dozy Joe behind the bar with the bottles of stolen vodka and the solid holograms of the KIA. Francine pulled the nose up until her forward view was filled with the violet sky. There, amongst the bright stars, she saw sunlight glint on 2 small, fast-moving objects. No chaff, no flares, and no ECM gave her only one option. A forward quarter evasion. Chicken. At 2 clicks per second. There would be one right moment to evade. Too early, and the missiles had time to correct their course. Too late, and they went off in your face. There was no machine for this, no clever bit of hardware that could do the calculation for you. Head-to-head with an SAM was a hind-brained thing. You either had it, or you were toast. The Angel had it. She fired the VTOL thrusters, and the jet did a 7G backflip. The missiles streaked past, hobbled by their own momentum. Now the canopy was filled with the Martian landscape as Francine dived for the cluttered radar shadow of the ground. There was a strange silver sheen to the surface, as if it was lit by reflected light from an impossible moon. Francine wondered if this was a bleed-over from some weird kind of greeny ECM. The sensors picked up heat signatures indicating a main engine burn by the 2 missiles as they fought to regain lost altitude. Francine was betting that they'd loop over before making another attack run. She cut the turbines to make an IR lock just that little bit harder and used the gyros to lift the nose again. The jet picked up some chop, falling tail first like that, even in the thin atmosphere. She sure hoped the missiles were using pattern recognition. If they were, this should confuse the hell out of them. They were coming round again, locked onto the jet and screaming down at full burn. Francine was aiming for as close to a right angle to the surface as possible. It became another race. This one to see which hit her first, the missiles or the ground. Francine retired the turbines and put them on idle. At 200 meters altitude, Francine redlined the turbines, pushing them all the way past safety. The world came down on top of her as the jet decelerated. The missiles screamed past, heading straight down. There were 2 brief splashes of light on the rear-facing look-down imager. Smart weapons, thought Francine. Just another military oxymoron. "Angel, brake left!" flashed Harry, yelling in her earphones. Without thinking, Francine threw the jet over. Sneak missile, a 3rd vulture running quiet, relying on the telemetry from the other 2 missiles, making a leisurely loop to fly right up her tailpipe. The radar proximity fuse mounted in the missile's nose behind the avionics saw the jet in its kill radius and fired. A shaped charge of flaked Brazilian TNT exploded. 33 marble-sized bomblets were blasted forward in an expanding cone. The aft quarter thermal imager on the jet flared out with the explosion. Francine felt the airframe shudder as 3 of the bomblets ripped through its carbon fibre skin. The starboard turbine rev rate shot up as fragments of its shattered blades spewed out of the exhaust outlet. Francine shut it down with a mental impulse, while another part of her mind assessed damage to the fuel tanks and tailplane servos. Without the starboard engine, Francine was looking at a glide landing in a near vacuum. She put the nose at 20 degrees above level and expanded the stubby wings to maximum, trying to use the wedge-shaped airframe as a single aerofoil. She made a slow bank until the Jacksonville beacon was dead ahead. Easily enough altitude to get there, and plenty of time to figure out what she was going to do when she did. Francine keyed her radio. "Hey, Flash! Thanks for the warning." "Static," answered her. "Flash, this is Angel. Do you copy?" Nothing. And Francine realised then that Flash Harry was gone, become just another pair of hologram eyes peering out between the bottles of PX beer and moonshine gin. She got a visual fix on the Jacksonville beacon and corrected her glide path by 2 degrees. Olympus Mons lay ahead, silver in the unreal moonlight. STS Central, Olympus Mons. Ming had Dogface on one of the repeater screens in her office and 2 Yak Harrises on another. The big holograms above the control pit were showing a lot of weird activity at the far end of the central line. To make things just that little bit more difficult, a drone had cleaned up the office and now she couldn't find anything. Especially the packet of Zap she kept stashed under the throw rug in case of emergencies. A 3rd repeater screen was taking telemetry data from Jacksonville base. The 2 Yak Harrises were completely still as the subset personalities ran off on an errand. Dogface didn't look good. His face was pale and strained. Ming reckoned that he couldn't override the medical computer for much longer without doing himself irreparable damage. Ming had never understood the floozies. Without the engine of ambition, they clung to a working-class ethic that had been out of fashion for centuries. Still, it was his funeral. A 4th repeater screen was taking a security feed from Olympus Mons West. A police drone's fish-eyed view of the clean-up operation, images selected according to machine priorities. "What about the girl?" asked Dogface. "She's on her way up," said Ming, "with an escort. I heard she greased 2 of those creatures." "And half a train," said Ming. "Blondie's got a couple of drones trying to reopen the line." "And Francine?" "Still approaching Jacksonville." "What are they saying?" "That in about 10 minutes the VSOC's going to be looking for a new godmother." "The doctor? Kadiatu?" "On board the jet as well," said Ming. "Francine's a good pilot." "Forget it, Dogface," said Ming. "Jacksonville says she's coming down on manual with no exterior sensors and half a turbine. If she could see, maybe. Blind? No chance." Olympus Mons. The forward monitor was covered in static. The doctor's faceplate had snapped down automatically as soon as the cabin filled with smoke. The HUD projected on the inside informed him that the surrounding atmosphere was almost pure halogen. He presumed it was a fire suppression measure. That, or the humans were getting creative with their materials technology again. He risked a cautious glance over at Kadiatu. Turning his head could be fatal if Francine pulled another 12G turn. It was difficult to tell if she was all right with the faceplate down, but the status lights on the suit were unchanged. She was lying still, in the embrace of the ejection seat, possibly unconscious. The doctor settled his head back onto the headrest and tried to feel what was going on. They'd been involved in a dogfight. That was obvious from the violent manoeuvres. That they'd been hit was also self-evident. Francine had remained ominously silent since the combat began, and the doctor didn't want to distract her. Do not talk to driver while bus is moving, thought the doctor. Sound advice. The smoke was clearing from the cabin. Judging from the subsonic vibrations he could feel through the headrest, they were missing an engine. This cabin has a bad attitude, thought the doctor. About 20 degrees nose up, and we're descending. Definitely a glide landing. If I should die, said the doctor, think only of this of me, that there is a corner of a foreign field that is forever Gallif-free. He calculated the probable impact velocity. All right then, he said, a very large corner of a foreign field. To take his mind off the danger, the doctor started a mental list of the hardware he'd caused to be destroyed since he arrived. He used a weighted point system since he was unsure of the exact monetary value. He wondered whether to include the wrecked dust cart. Normally, companions only contributed half scores, but did the ersatz Benny count? He hummed something appropriate and calculated what he'd get for a really spectacular plane crash. He always gave himself bonus points for those. "What's that noise?" asked Cadiatu. "Edith Piaf," said the doctor, "born on a doorstep and sang the blues." "I'd sing the blues," said Cadiatu, "if I'd been born on a doorstep. What's the song about?" "Regret." "What did she regret?" "Absolutely nothing," said the doctor. They hit the ground. The crash unfolded with agonizing slowness. He could have done without that. They were slammed forward in the harness, and the cabin slammed flat. There was the sharp, rending sound that a sheet of carbon fibre makes when you rip it in half. There was a moment of weightlessness as the jet bounced, and then went back to the serious business of tearing itself apart. Rents appeared in the cabin's port wall. Through the hole, the doctor watched in astonishment as sheets of spray rushed past. Torque forces shoved him sideways as the jet slewed to the right. The final impact with the crash barrier was almost gentle. It had to be worth 36 points at least, thought the doctor. More if we landed on something expensive. He looked back at Cadiatu, who looked back at him. "Whose doorstep was it anyway?" asked Cadiatu. "I have no idea," said the doctor. It took the Jacksonville emergency crew 15 minutes to cut them out. A couple of paramedics climbed in first to run a quick diagnostic on their suits. Satisfied that neither of them was going to decompress, the paramedics allowed them up. As he was helped out, the doctor got his chance to look at the crash site. Jacksonville had laid down 2 kilometres of compression foam, and the jet had skidded along its whole length, leaving a significant percentage of itself behind. The doctor could see part of the tail assembly, 200 metres back, protruding from the foam like a shark's fin. "How's the pilot?" he asked. "She's alive," said one of the paramedics, politely waving to indicate that she was talking. Her suit had a major's flash on the left breast. "But we can't cut into the canopy without compromising her life support. We're bringing up a gantry to take it out in one piece." There was a military ambulance waiting, built along the same lines as the dust cart. The major accompanied them into the rear airlock. Once the pressure had normalised, she took her helmet off to reveal scarification patterns on her high Yoruba cheekbones. Cadiatu started to struggle with her helmet, but the major restrained her with a hand on her arm. "Emergency seals," she said. "We'll have to cut it off." The inner airlock door slid open. There were 2 more paramedics in army fatigues waiting inside. The major got them to sit down on a pair of reclining couches and pulled on a headphone set. "All right, Mullah, back to base," she said. "But take it easy this time." He felt the ambulance pull smoothly away. "Bavarians," said the major. Always in a rush. The paramedics used calibrated laser scalpels to cut away the helmet seals. That was some landing, said the Major. She was smiling, but her eyes were tense as they started easing the helmets off. Perhaps she's worried that our heads will come off as well, thought the doctor. He felt cool air on his face. See, he said, it's still attached to my shoulders. Planning in depth, said Kadiatu. My sacred backside. Kadiatu's face was puffed and swollen by G-trauma. Dark bruises surrounded her eyes, giving them a sleepy look. She looked at the doctor. You look like a big bruise, she said. The Major gave them each a squeezy bottle of orange juice, with strict instructions to take small sips only as their suits were cut away. The Major was a bit surprised to find the doctor dressed in his street clothes underneath. I was in a hurry, explained the doctor. Kadiatu laughed and then winced. That hurts, she said. The paramedics cut away her undersuit to reveal swollen welts around her shoulders, neck, and in a line down her front where the fastenings had cut in. At 12 Gs, even the weight of your clothes can cause severe bruising. All my clothes are back in the dust cart, said Kadiatu. She leaned forward to let them peel the undersuit off her back. There were vertical welts down her shoulder blades. Which is all your fault. The doctor watched as the muscles moved under her skin. The Gallifreyans once looked like that, thought the doctor, when the world was young. What about you? The Major asked the doctor. I'm fine, he said. Trust me. The Major hesitated for a moment before nodding. She pulled a hand scan from a niche in the equipment rack and ran it over the doctor's body. He waited for the inevitable questions, but they never came. Instead, the Major shunted the results to a portable monitor and showed it to him. That normal for you? She asked. Yes, he said. I'm getting far too well known on this planet, thought the doctor. He might have to do something about that soon. Real soon. The Major ran the hand scan over Kadiatu, starting with her feet. Bruising, she told the paramedic. Bruising, contusion, get some jam on that. The paramedic gently applied a clear gel to the welts around Kadiatu's hips and thighs. The Major continued scanning. No internal damage to the uterus, enlarged vermiform appendix, but no sign of infection, so I guess that's normal. Large liver, the Major smiled at Kadiatu. You got a big heart and lungs. How long can you hold your breath? Never timed myself, said Kadiatu. Sports? Kadiatu shook her head. Ever break any bones? No. Ever been sick? No, said Kadiatu. You're the first doctor ever gave me a scan. The Major held the hand scan over Kadiatu's head for a long time, staring at the monitor. Something wrong? Asked Kadiatu. No, said the Major. You've got a thick skull, so it takes a while to build up a picture. From where he was, the doctor could see the monitor for himself. Kadiatu did have a thick skull, and a lot more besides. STS Central, Olympus Mons. Like that, said Zemina, except with narrower lips. The video fit face on the screen altered slightly, but the nose was still wrong. Shorter nose, said Zemina. Across the office, the Chinese woman who seemed to be in charge was talking on the phone to the ugliest man she'd ever seen. They were using a lot of technical jargon that Zemina didn't understand. The gist of it was that a jet had crash-landed at Jacksonville and all the passengers had survived, something that the woman and the ugly man had trouble believing. The Chinese woman looked over at Zemina. Have you finished yet? Nearly. The woman came and looked over her shoulder. Good enough, she said. Zemina didn't like her. The first thing she'd said when Zemina was shown in was, God's girl, you want to get them tits fixed sometime. Zemina didn't like people she didn't know calling her girl. The woman had style, though. When she talked, people listened. What's this for? You know what pattern recognition is? Course. We'll feed this image into the monitoring system, and it should be able to track your friend for us. She's not my friend, said Zemina. Don't think she's anybody's friend, really." "I wish you'd tell the doctor that," said the woman. Jacksonville. Kadiatu managed a quick shower at the officers' mess. The Major lent her some of her off-duty clothes. The selection left Kadiatu wondering what the Major must look like out on the town. A pair of red 680s were too tight but serviceable, and the only top that fitted her was a luminous canary yellow lurex skin tight with "Eat Fish and Die" heat printed across the chest. The Major rustled up a pair of ankle-height service boots from base stores. They were made from soft elephant leather with airwear soles. Kadiatu had to sit down to do up the double fasteners. The Major held out a shoulder holster. Kadiatu stared at it for a moment and then raised her arm so that the Major could buckle it on. It was a woman's holster, hanging low so that the gun wouldn't catch on her breast when she drew. When the Major leaned forward to reach around Kadiatu's back, she saw that raised scars on her face were tinted umber and turquoise. "What's this for?" asked Kadiatu. "We found the laser torch in your suit pocket," said the Major. "It was set on a killing frequency, but the batteries were nearly exhausted." The Major opened a ribbed metal case and drew out a pistol. 1 megawatt, 0.01 second burst, she said. "Does 600 bursts a minute on full auto, but your charge is only good for 100, so keep it on single." She handed the pistol over, and Kadiatu felt the weight settle in her palm. In a single unthinking moment, she flipped the gun and slipped it into the holster. "You've used one before?" said the Major. "It's illegal for me to carry this," said Kadiatu. "What does that matter?" said the Major. "You're with him." "Maybe, but do the police know that?" asked Kadiatu. "Turn around," said the Major. "What?" "Your hair," said the Major. "Turn around." Kadiatu turned round, and the Major seized her extensions and started to braid them. She kept the tension up, pulling hair and scalp back from the face. Kadiatu remembered her mother pulling tight when she was young, hard enough to fold the scalp in places. While the Major worked, she spoke in Kadiatu's ear. "He strikes a stone in the forest," she chanted. "Stone bleeds blood. He dances savagely in the courtyard of the impertinent. He sets the liar's roof on fire." "Who is he?" "He is the leopard with flaming eyes." "Who is he?" "He is in the discharge of a laser, in the lightning flash of the semiconductor." "Tell me his name." "He is the bow wave across the ocean of time. His name!" "He is Shango, god of lightning," said the Major. "All things to all cultures," said Kadiatu. "Stand up," said the Major. Kadiatu checked in the mirror. Her hair was tied into a severe series of bundled plaits that rested on the nape of her neck. Hair was important to the Yoruba. How they wore it was once a matter of social importance. But this style was severely practical. It kept the hair out of the eyes and protected the vulnerable portion of the neck. Fighting style, her mother would have called it. The Major gave Kadiatu a leather jacket that clinked when it brushed against a locker. "Kevlar lining," said the Major. "He's not a god," said Kadiatu. "His temples are the preserve of priestesses," said the Major. "It's women who dance for the lightning god. His spirit possesses them through the dance." "Why me?" "Don't ask me that," said the Major. "Ask the dead." Actura Station, Stunnel Terminus. The other floozies reminded Blondie that as the youngest he was still honorary dog's body and sent him off to get food. He didn't mind. It beat welding the barricades together. They'd all pulled in at least 2 drones to do the work. When he saw them collected all in one place, Blondie realised that over the years, more than just the drones' personalities had been taken from their operators. Credit cards drones were so customised that it was almost impossible to determine the original make. Honda, perhaps, from the early 2000 series, but Blondie wouldn't bet money on it. Lambada's drones were painted a rainforest green and were, well, aggressive. They had to be segregated from the dog-faced drones, or they spent more time fighting than working. Old Sam's drones were barely visible, backgrounds sliding across Mimitech polycarbon shells. tools and manipulators emerging from jack turrets when they worked. The drones had more hatches than tools, and Blondie wondered what was hidden behind the spares. Maybe they should have brought in a few more of those. Blondie felt that he should do something about his own unfashionably pristine units. He considered painting a black rose on their flanks. Would she understand that, he asked himself? Would she approve? More importantly, would she notice? The KGB went in for on-site catering. A portable canteen was set up in one corner of the Galeria. Old Sam didn't approve. He'd have been happier if the KGB troops had been eating vacuum-packed E-rations, preferably tearing the foil packages open with their teeth. He called them a bunch of FNGs and didn't rate their chances in a real fight. Blondie didn't think they looked that bad. Certainly their hardware was impressive. Some of the troopers turned to watch him as he picked his way over to the canteen. They were field stripping their pulse rifles, neat rows of components laid out on white linen sheets, a collection of faces above the raised neck guards of their armour. The canteen was the size of a commercial freight module, the kind that fit on a transit flatbed. When mobile, it ran on small rubber wheels, 6 on each side, now locked into their up position. The fold-down counter ran 1/3 of its length. Blondie bought 4 big bucket meals from a European Muslim woman. 2 for him, credit card and lambada, and 2 for old Sam. The Muslim woman processed his money pen and handed over the litre-capacity buckets. Blondie thought she might have smiled at him, but under the veil it was hard to tell. "Have a nice day," said the woman. STS Central, Olympus Mons. "There she is," said Zemina, pointing. The screen showed the view from a scanning security camera on the Trans-Olympia platform at Olympus Mons. Benny was clearly visible, alighting from a train, a pink "found" icon hovering over her head. The data square in the right-hand corner of the screen put the time at 11:45 GMT, 5 minutes past. Ming looked over at Dogface. "Got that?" "Where's she going?" asked Zemina. The internal phone chimed. It was the sector manager from the pit. "Yes," said Ming. "We've got a problem," said the manager. "Half the trains in the northeastern sector have stopped." "Technical fault?" asked Ming. "Signalling failure," said the manager. Ming put the sector up on her big repeater screen. The affected area formed a rough semicircle around the Actura station. "Work on it," Ming told the manager and cut the link. "Do you see it, Dogface?" "I see it." "What do you think?" "I think someone's fucking with our signalling," said Dogface. Ming linked back with the sector manager. "Try backup," she said. "If that doesn't work, go to manual. Keep at least some of the trains running." "There she is again," said Zemina. Live feed from a camera in the Rancher's Market area. "Hey," said Zemina, "I've worked that place. It's only 6 levels down." Ming turned to her phone and punched in the direct line to the Nueva Lubyanka. "KGB," said their reception program in an unnaturally bright voice. "Sword and shield to the police since 1917. This is Ming, armed response team to Rancher's Market." "She's gone into a lift," said Zemina. "Fugitive now in one of the passenger lifts," said Ming. "I'm downloading the likeness." She pressed a button and shot the video fit image to Nueva Lubyanka. "Down or up?" she asked Zemina. "Down." "She's going for fusion core," said Dogface. "You must contact the doctor," said one of the Yak Harrises. "You're back," said Ming. "You call him." "There have been difficulties," said the construct. "Isn't that Yak Harris?" said Zemina. "No," said Ming. "It's a Yak Harris. You must contact the doctor." "I'm on it," said Ming, raising Jacksonville. "Give me a break." The doctor wasn't at Jacksonville, but Ming managed to trace him to a VIP shuttle on its way to Olympus Mons. Kadiatu answered the phone. "Benny's back," said Ming, "and heading straight for Fusion Core." "He's way ahead of you," said Kadiatu. "That's where we're going." There was a squawk from the Yak Harris monitor. "Hey, people," said one of the Yak Harrises. "I think you've been compromised." The monitor screen imploded. The doctor appeared on the phone. "It's penetrated your computer network. I'll try to prevent anyone getting to the Stunnel Gateway." "You're expecting this?" "I suspected it. Well, thanks for telling me. I can't be everywhere at once." The doctor looked out of shot. "This is our stop. Whatever you do, don't panic." The link terminated. Out in the control room, the big holograms de-rezzed into clouds of silver static. "That's easy for you to say," said Ming. Fusion Core, Olympus Mons. "Have you noticed," said the doctor, "how much time we've spent in lifts recently?" He kept his eyes fixed on the level indicator. "Back there," said Kadiatu, "the Major seemed to think you were Shango." "Who's Shango?" "Yoruba thunder god." "Oh, Shango," said the doctor. "Did you know the Yoruba have over 200 deities?" "Are you?" "Mind you, Shintoism has thousands." The doctor turned to look at her. "Do I look like a thunder god?" "How would I know?" said Kadiatu. "I've never met one." "Faced with the unexplained," said the doctor, "people have a tendency to let their imaginations run wild. There are no gods. I should know. I've met a few. The Shango cult is almost exclusively female. People get the wrong end of the stick." "I'll bet." "It's true," said the doctor. "I was in Ife during the 10th century. There may have been some static electricity involved. I was also in Mesopotamia in the time of Gilgamesh, and I visited all 3 Atlantises. It's not my fault. It's the planet. Things happen there." "Why?" "I don't know," said the doctor. "Your planet just seems to be a major time-space nexus." "Lucky us," said Kadiatu. She realised the doctor was staring intently at her. "Shadows," he said. "Forced evolution, spirits, demons, gods. Coincidences. I'm missing something." "Do you dream?" "Of course I dream. Everybody does." "Your father didn't," said the doctor. "Any that reoccur?" "Some," said Kadiatu, "when I'm stressed out." "Describe one." "Beach," said Kadiatu. "Dead people dancing. No, not that one." "I can't remember any of the other ones." "Look at me," said the doctor. Kadiatu looked into his strange eyes. "Basket," she heard herself say. "Old woman in a basket over a big pit. Something's wrong with her eye. I think she's a witch." "Does she say anything?" "She's cursing about children. It's a bad curse." "Then what?" "She cuts the rope that's holding the basket up and falls into the pit." The doctor clicked his fingers. "The Pythia," he said. "Interesting. You and I might have more in common than I first thought." "Who's the Pythia?" "The ancient line of seeresses who once ruled my home planet Gallifrey. When the last of the line was overthrown, she cursed the entire population of Gallifrey to perpetual sterility. No children. Ever." "Has this got anything to do with the transit system?" "Nothing at all," said the doctor, "for which we should be profoundly grateful." "Then why is it so important?" "Have you any idea what kind of power a curse like that represents?" asked the doctor. "It creates shockwaves and patterns within the metafabric of the space-time continuum. The procreative impulses of an entire species can't just dissipate. It has to go somewhere. It must have been channeled by the Pythia's curse, and she knew we were in contact." "Knew what?" "Something I forgot a long time ago." "What, for God's sake?" "I don't know," said the doctor. "I forgot it, didn't I?" The lift stopped, and its doors opened. In the distance, they could hear a Sile wailing. "Too late," said the doctor. "Where the hell are you going?" asked the technician. Benny flexed her wrist back and shot him through the chest. The power plant had maroon carpeting and cream walls hung with framed abstract paintings at regular intervals. The thick shag absorbed any ambient noise and produced a kind of breathless hush. There had always been debate about the iconography relating to fusion power plants in the pre-expansion era. Benny followed the signs to the control centre. The decor was obviously designed to be as calming as possible. This hinted at a deep-seated anxiety about the forces they were unleashing within the generator. The corridor opened into an informal refreshment area. A cluster of easy chairs and sofas was centred around a free-standing entertainment console. A couple were sitting on a sofa watching television. A man was in the kitchen area, pouring himself a coffee from a stainless steel jug. Benny shot him first. The jug made a hollow ringing sound when it bounced on the countertop. The situational realists maintained that the period's apprehension about their power systems stemmed from the primitive safety standards. Benny herself had defended that position during a drunken argument that followed a conference at the Institute of Human Ecology on Cygni 6. One of the couple on the sofa made the mistake of standing up to see what was happening. The shell blew the top of her head off. The Silurians felt that it was the manifestation of humanity's deep-seated guilt complex about their ruthless exploitation of the homeworld. But then the Silurians said that about everything. The remaining woman on the sofa was a bit more experienced and rolled out of Benny's line of fire. The first shot blew a fist-sized hole in an easy chair. Benny had read a paper that attributed it to the upheavals following the first ecological crisis. She'd read it because it came at the extreme end of her own period. The title had been The Role of the Butler Institute in the Terran Post-Nuclear Period. The woman tried to scramble behind the entertainment console. Benny stepped to one side and shot her in the back before she could get up. She couldn't remember who wrote the paper. The control room was protected by double doors of plexiglass. Through them, she could see the technicians panicking at her approach. One of them was talking urgently into a phone. Someone was shouting. She could hear it as a murmur through the doors. Professor Beal Carter Kazansky, she remembered. That's who had written the paper. She'd read it while travelling middle berth to heaven. She usually caught up with the journals in transit. There had been some interesting stuff about youth gangs and eco-terrorists. Benny didn't bother with the 9-digit security keypad by the doors. She just stood there and waited patiently for them to open of their own accord. There was a high-pitched sound filtering through the soundproof doors. Inside the control room, someone was screaming. Kadiatu pulled the pistol from the holster after they encountered the first body. The doctor gave her a hard look, but said nothing. What could he say? There were more bodies in a small refreshment area. Kadiatu recognised the signature of the exit wounds, the way the ragged edges of the wound pushed through rents torn in the clothes. She concentrated hard on the injuries to avoid looking at the people. There was a strong smell of cordite, blood, and coffee. The doctor picked up the fallen coffee jug and set it carefully back on the counter. Kadiatu zipped the major's jacket up to her neck. The doctor pointed down the corridor and opened his mouth to say something. The jacket saved Kadiatu's life. The kinetic energy of the soft-nosed slug was dissipated by the flexible sheet of Kevlar sewn into the lining of the jacket. Enough to stop the projectile from blowing out her chest, but not enough to stop her from being smashed forward into the doctor's arms. The doctor grabbed the collar of her jacket in his left hand and pulled her further off balance. Kadiatu instinctively realised what he was doing and let herself be spun round as her forward momentum was translated around the pivot of his arm. As she turned, she saw the coffee jug leave his right hand and fly across the room. He must have picked it up in the same moment as their attacker fired the first shot. The jug bounced off the attacker's face with a hollow bong sound and a spurt of blood. Her hand came up to cover her nose. "Not again," said Benny. Kadiatu shot her 3 bursts, vaporised flesh blooming like pink carnations on Benny's chest. The doctor was by her side before she hit the ground. "Where's the real Benny?" he asked. The woman made a weak gurgling sound, laughing. There were 3 ice cream scoop-sized craters in her upper rib cage. Kadiatu couldn't believe she was still alive. "Actually, I thought I was the real Benny," whispered the ersatz Benny. The eyes flickered in Kadiatu's direction. "This one's good, isn't she? Doesn't hesitate. Very good, said the doctor. Too good for you, said the ersatz Benny. She's not mine, said the doctor. She belongs to herself. The woman made that sick, gurgling laugh again. A time-travelling archaeologist, she said. I must have been out of my mind. They waited, but there was nothing else. I'm fine. Just some major bruising on my back, said Kadiatu as the doctor stalked off towards the control room. Don't worry about me. The ersatz Benny twitched and made coughing noises. Kadiatu turned back, her pistol held ready. Listen, it said. A word from the freshly dead. Go on, said Kadiatu. Evolution, it said, is the response by living organisms to their environment. In one respect, said Kadiatu. Don't argue with the dead, girl, it said. He's become a major factor in that environment. You are the human response to him. Kadiatu realised that the ersatz Benny's lips weren't moving when she spoke, hadn't moved since the doctor had left. Which is the more dangerous, girl? It asked. The male or the female leopard? The female, said Kadiatu. Why? Her children, said Kadiatu. Her children make her dangerous. What will you sacrifice for the children? Kadiatu scrambled backwards. For a moment, she thought she saw tears of fire well up around the ersatz Benny's left eye, an eye that had become alien in colour and full of secrets. Then eye, face and neck were obliterated by the bursts of coherent light from her gun. Stop wasting ammunition, said the doctor. Did you hear that? Asked Kadiatu. Hear what? Nothing, said Kadiatu. Then I couldn't have heard it, said the doctor. Could I? Kadiatu followed him out. What's the best route from here to the Stunnel terminus? He asked. The central line extension runs straight to it, said Kadiatu. There's a station 4 levels up from here. Did she sabotage the power plant? Worse than that, said the doctor. Actura Station, Stunnel terminus. Lambarda dropped her big chicken bit onto the floor when she saw it. Shit, she said. It's not that bad, said old Sam. A bit over-seasoned, though. The power feed, she said. On the monitor, the line marking the power feeding into the Stunnel gateway from their side had suddenly started climbing. It now matched the power input from the other side. Tell Ming, said Lambarda. She's got to shut it down. We lost the link with Ming, said Credit Card, about 15 minutes ago. They still have to come down here and switch the thing on, said old Sam. Yeah, said Lambarda. But now that's all they have to do. Whoever they are, said Credit Card. We know who they are, said Blondie. Cake-eating free surfers from hell. That's a great comfort, said Lambarda. You want that big chicken bit or not? Asked old Sam. Olympus Mons, Central Line. There were 2 cake monsters waiting on the platform. They stood chatting to each other just like normal people. One of them was holding a free surfing board. Kadiatu ducked back into the entranceway and told the doctor. Reinforcements, said the doctor, just in case the fake Benny didn't make it. When you plan, said Kadiatu, plan in depth. Get rid of them, said the doctor. What, just shoot them? Asked Kadiatu. Yes, said the doctor, shoot them. What happened to the sanctity of life? It just got filed under D for desperate expediency. Just checking. Kadiatu stepped round the corner and opened fire. She kept firing until both cake monsters stopped moving. By the time she'd finished, the pistol's LED charge was flashing. I need a bigger gun, said Kadiatu. What for? Asked the doctor. Dead is dead, but not fast enough. We need a train, said the doctor. The destination indicator was blank. Typical, said the doctor. You wait ages for a train, and then 3 come at once. I doubt that, said Kadiatu. The STS map was showing a large swathe of black lines in the northern Mars area. Black for no service. Someone doesn't want us to get there. I'll use the board, said the doctor, running down the platform. No, shouted Kadiatu. You'll kill yourself. The doctor scooped up the board in one fluid motion and ran faster. A coward dies many times before his death, said the doctor. This is no time for Shakespeare, said Kadiatu, starting after him. It takes 2 to free surf. No, it doesn't, said the doctor, and threw the board onto the friction field. You just think it does. He jumped onto the board. Kadiatu ran parallel to him as the board coasted towards the tunnel gateway. We can get a train. Too late, said the doctor. We're in the end game now. The Queen has defected, the knights are in trouble, and the king's out of position. What are you going to do? Do, said the doctor. I'm going to improvise.